Hi. Thanks for joining me again today. Welcome back to another installment of our weekly card reading series using the Local Honey picture box. This reading is good for the week beginning on Sunday, February the 26th, 2023. And let's just take a minute here to get centered. Think about how you're doing, what's on your mind, what kinds of insights or guidance you want to get from this reading. Just take a minute to take some deep breaths and arrive in this space together. Oh, geez. Okay. Okay, so let's see what these cards have to say to us today. The first card that we have here, this is the Thank Yourself card. This card is about taking the time to give gratitude to our own selves for the good things that we've done. If there's things you've done in the past that have set you up to be in a better place today than you would have been otherwise if you hadn't have done those things, then that's worth taking a minute to recognize and to be grateful to yourself for that. It's a very simple thing that sometimes we're just on to the next thing so much in life that we don't pause to reflect on like the journey that we've traveled and the things we've done that have really gotten us to a better place than we would have been if we hadn't made those certain decisions. And so taking the time to show gratitude to ourselves for those things is a way to build like a sense of appreciation internally for where you are, for the decisions you've made that have set you up well, for the lessons you've learned from the risks you've taken, and all that kind of stuff that you could just take a minute to really appreciate. And when we take the time to show gratitude to ourselves instead of just letting everything pass on and being on to the next thing without really acknowledging those positives, then we're missing an opportunity. When we don't acknowledge those positives, we're missing an opportunity to kind of build our self-image as someone who gives and receives good things. And it can just be really comforting to take a minute to be like, oh, I'm really thankful for this. So that's like a simple thing. That is the card in the spread that is about the context that we're coming out of from this past week. So it might mean that either in the past week, like something came up that gave you a really big cause to appreciate how you've set yourself up, like appreciate your past self and where it has gotten you to. Maybe you need to take more time to do that, to really have a sense of perspective on where you are today and the good things you've done for yourself in the past that have brought you to that place, because those are totally worth appreciating. Now, this middle card, this position in the spread represents the main focus area for this week. This card is called Uncensor Yourself. Now, what that means is being allowed to notice your own thoughts and feelings and observations without having such a tight wrap on that internally to where you're out of touch with your own experience. If we have been maybe grown up in certain like emotionally unavailable environments, or if we grew up in situations or have spent long periods of time being socialized, it didn't have to be in childhood, it could be in your adulthood, whatever it is, if you spent long periods of time being socialized in situations where it wasn't safe or it wasn't acceptable for you to admit the truth of what you really felt, what you really thought, the truth of what you saw going on around you, anything like that, then sometimes we, as a coping mechanism for surviving in those kinds of situations, we develop a pattern of kind of censoring or blocking ourselves off from our own internal experience and not even being aware of what those things are. Like if there's no way you can take action on those things, then sometimes it's easier to just not to just cut off awareness from them altogether to cope. And so uncensoring yourself is about really kind of reversing that coping mechanism and learning again to be in touch with your true feelings, to be a witness to your actual observations and thoughts. You know, sometimes like also people get this really messed up message that like if you observe something unsavory about another person, then that somehow makes you bad. Like, I know this happened to me in my past a lot. Like, if I would say something true about somebody that wasn't very nice or that wasn't how someone else wanted to see that person, then they would shame and punish me for voicing that rather than admit that that was actually the truth of what was going on. And so that's just like a personal example of a way that I learned to self-censor, because it was like, oh, like I'm being told that if I observe something that's not so positive about someone else's behavior, then somehow that's supposed to make me a bad person, which is like a really twisted message. And so that's when we learn to uncensor, like, oh, it's not good to have to say things like that about other people, or it's not good to like, you know, have thoughts like that. Like, oh, that's a really mean thing to think about somebody. Really, it might just be the truth, you know? And so uncensoring yourself is like becoming aware of those things again and allowing the full spectrum of your own thoughts, feelings, opinions, observations to be allowed, first of all, within your own internal ecosystem so that you're actually recognizing them. And then from that point, you can like actually act on them as well. So yeah, there's probably something going on this week where like, you probably, there's something, some part of you knows the truth about what's going on, but you like feel like it's not okay to admit that, or like it's not okay to recognize that, like something is threatening about being honest about that. And so it's like really being willing to uncensor that internal experience to where you can acknowledge that that's what's going on. Now, the final card in this spread, this one is called the Grief Allowance card. This card is about how much are we comfortable allowing ourselves to experience a grief process without blocking it or shutting it down or trying to rush it prematurely or anything like that. You know, our culture at large, I would say, is pretty illiterate when it comes to grief. Grief just means like anytime you have a loss of some kind, whether it's a person, a relationship, an idea about the world, a potential future, anything that you were attached to that was part of the psychological landscape of your reality. When you lose that thing, then you have to go through a grief process in order for your mind to reorient itself to the new reality. And if you don't get to go through that whole grief process, then your orientation to the new reality is like compromised, and that can make it a lot harder to like function as a person. And so this grief process that you have to go through can involve, you know, like what's that lady's name? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She developed like the research around the stages of grief, which is like denial, anger, bargaining, despair, and acceptance. They don't always necessarily go in that order, but the point of bringing that up is to say that like if you have gone through a loss of some kind, you know, you lost a person, you lost a relationship, you lost a dream that you were really focused on, you lost a home or a sense of a role that you had in life, you lost the idea of a potential future that you thought you were going to have, you lost your illusions about the way the world was. You know, it could be anything, it could be something abstract or concrete, but if there's something has happened where there has been a loss in your sense of reality, then you need to really allow yourself to go through all of your reactions to that, whether that's like being really fucking mad about it, being in a place where you really can't accept it, you're kind of wanting to go back and forth, like, oh my god, like, is there anything I can do to make this not be the case? Like, what could I have done differently to change this outcome? What could I possibly do? Like, you're scouring in your mind anything you could possibly do to change and make this not be the reality. That's like the bargaining phase, right? You know, to go through like deep despair when you realize, like, oh my god, this actually is the new reality, and that thing that I lost really is gone now, and that fucking sucks. You know, to cycle through all of those feelings as much as you need to, and at whatever pace you need to, that's something that is not really encouraged in emotionally unavailable environments, which our culture at large I would classify as an emotionally unavailable environment. So a lot of us learned in our childhoods to like block our grief process. Like if it was like not acceptable for us to express those feelings to the extent that we really needed to, if that was like bothersome to the people in our lives and they would try to like shut that down from us, or if we learned that, like, you know, there's no point in expressing those things because people don't want to hear it, or if we got like really fucked up messages about, like, you know, expressing those kinds of feelings is weak, or it means there's something bad about us. There's like a lot of toxic masculinity where, based on how you're socialized with gender, certain people are taught like not to expect or not to express the full range of their feelings, that will somehow make them lesser, which is like complete bullshit. So there's a lot of programming that we have around the acceptability of going through a grief process and expressing and fully experiencing all of the phases that need to go into that for it to happen healthily, for us to really get to a point where we can comprehend the new reality. That is like really, it's so important to be able to have that healthy grief process, because grief is how you heal yourself after a loss. Like, there's no healing from a loss without grief. I mean, as much as that sucks, as uncomfortable as grief is, as much of a pain in the ass as it is, it's really the only way to heal after a serious loss. So if you're blocking yourself off from your grief process, then you're blocking yourself off from healing. Okay, so this position in the spread is about like the piece of advice for dealing with the main focus area, which is uncensoring yourself. So the way that all of these cards are like stacking up this week, I feel like the message is like, there's something going on in your emotional experience that you're trying to suppress or deny or like push away from yourself, or that you're having a hard time like fully accepting. And it's probably your grief around something. So you really need to unleash that grieving process. You need to unleash your own awareness that it's okay for you to feel that way, and then create some space for it to actually begin to process through more. Because the more you allow yourself to grieve, and the more of a sense of like, the reason it's called grief allowance is because it's not just about the fact that grief exists, but our own willingness and capacity to allow that in our experience and to support that. And so, like, you probably need to expand your grief allowance in order to help your internal experience flow in a more self-honest way emotionally. And there's probably something coming up for you this week where, like, you're resisting your feelings around something, and in order to really unplug that and get it flowing again, you have to open up more allowance for you to have all the stages of that grief process and create more of a space for that. Like, carve out some time for it, like decide to have an attitude that you're gonna accept that to be part of your experience right now. And honestly, the way that I'm looking at the way the whole spread is shaping out, like, the sense of time doesn't have to be linear in this. So like, once you do that grief allowance work, like that allowance work around your attitude of being willing to allow more grief through your experience, because you know, if you're not allowing it to flow through, then it's just getting blocked. It's not actually going anywhere. Like, it's still there, and it's probably going to be causing haywire in your system internally if you're not coping with it and allowing it to express through. And so by allowing yourself more space to grieve and a better attitude around accepting grief, then that is going to be how you set yourself up to thank yourself for that afterwards, because that's how you're going to heal more. And so if you can improve your attitude around grief, and like whatever fucked up messages I got about it being not okay to grieve, not okay to express these feelings, not okay to have these feelings, not okay to even acknowledge these feelings, like whatever I can do to choose to go in a different direction than that, that's going to set me up to where I'm going to be really thanking myself down the road for allowing more healing into my experience, because there's really no other way to heal without allowing that grief to come through. Man, grief sucks. It's really hard. It's really hard, especially if it's like big things where you're like, man, is this grief ever going to end? But moving through it is better than blocking it, because when you block it, you're just prolonging the process. And like when the grief is flowing, like it can feel awful, but at least it's moving, and it's like an appropriate what's the word I'm looking for? It's like the appropriate motion of those feelings to process through, rather than being blocked off and dammed away, and making you really stopped up and unable to be as present to your life as you can if you let your emotions flow, and if you allow yourself to actually grieve your losses so that you can move forward and be in the new reality in a more centered and realistic way. There's a lot of grief in life too, that's just a fact. So the better you can get at allowing that grief to flow through you when it needs to, is the better you're going to be able to be emotionally available to yourself and others, and to really experience life and be present to what's going on, and not be like this blocked off person that can't emotionally make contact with other people because you're avoiding your own grief so much. So I think that's the message for this week. Yeah, good luck with all that. Big feelings suck, but it's better to feel them than to block them. And if you need help or support, you should always get that. Yep. All right, that's all for this week. Thank you for joining me, and hope to see you next time.